Okay. Thanks, Laura, for inviting me.
Yeah.
As scary as this process has been, I think you probably all know. But we try to say yes, and it's not about really. If I'm putting my ego aside, is there room for fear? Really, it's like I like to tell people, when they're gonna speak at their first meeting, that it's like you're in a room full of people that love you, you know, and I'm Jim. Let's get this out of the way before I forget. I am an alcoholic.
I do.
Let's see. I do have a sponsor, and he knows I'm his sponsor, or he knows he's my sponsor, and all of that. So let's see. How do we do this? Um, so my sobriety date is December 15th, 2015, and so I'm working on year 9. Before that, it was June 20th, 2000, and I made it. It's it. We'll get into that later. Haven't had a drink since 2000. That's not my sobriety date. Before that, it was April 16th, 1985, and I did make it a little over 12 years at that time. But again, in all, this is an honest program, and looking back now, I can't say for sure that I probably was doing poppers, which is a mood altering drug. So, today I would not consider that. I can't claim that as sobriety. Um, Before that, my sobriety date was August 12th, 1978. That was my first official sobriety date in AA. And again, I have to say, now for me, um, my sobriety today is not, nothing mood altering unless prescribed by a doctor. And for me, I have to say, for a legitimate medical condition, because there's a story there.
Yeah.
So, but for me, really. And you said, how do you remember all those dates? Well, I was 20 years old. And I've been in Alcoholics Anonymous a whole lot more than I've been out of Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, if we, do the math, it's like since 1978, I have drank for 5 years. I had a 3 year and a 2 year. Now, there was also a 4 year. My more recent relapse was drugs, and so but anyway, so okay, I'm from Seattle. I grew up in Rainier Beach. We moved to Kent when I started high school, and went to high school. We used anyway. So uh, my family's Catholic. We went to church every Sunday. I went to Catholic school up until the 5th grade when we moved to Kent, and then I went to public schools. Um, my dad is alcoholic. Um, he wasn't terribly hardcore. He was a very good provider. I think he learned real early in life that hard liquor didn't agree with him, so he tried to stick to beer. But he was an alcoholic. His dad was an alcoholic. My mom's dad was an alcoholic. Um, so I've got it. I've got it in my genes. Um, my mom early on, I think she was an Al-Anon. She grew up with an alcoholic father. I mean, he was nuts. There was when I remember when I was a little kid, we'd be at their house in Renton, and the washing machine sat in the kitchen. It was an old house, and there was this big old hole in the side of the washing machine, where the metal was bent out, and it was kind of through the corner. I found out later. I used to like to play with it. As a little toddler, I'd put it on my finger. My grandfather, I think he shot a shotgun or some kind of gun in the house. He used to chase my grandmother around like that, accusing her of stuff that he was imagining. Um, so anyway, my mom was real high strung, um, and she would often lose her temper and go overboard when it came to physical punishment. Um, my home did not feel safe to me. Um, and So as a little boy, I would always have these little camps outside. Um, one time it was like between our garage and the neighbor's garages, and I built this thing, and and I'd have this is my living room, and this is my kitchen, and this is my bedroom, and I have my little kid table out there, and I'd pretend I was eating, or I'd pretend I was sleeping. The thing, it felt safe, I had this safe thing, and it didn't dawn on me until this period of sobriety, I think, that what I was really doing, with that, I was trying to find a safe space, um, and. So we moved to Kent when I was 11 years old. Started the 6th grade out there, and that's probably about the time I got hold of enough liquor for the first time to get drunk. Up until then, though, I always think this is kind of an important part of my story. Though, is my 2 favorite games as a little boy was to play priest and to play bartender. And our house in Rainier Beach actually had a really nice wet bar down in the basement. I don't remember them ever using it, but it was really, really nice mahogany, and it had glass shelves in back with a light and whatnot. And there were bottles down there, and I would tip them back, and there was always a drop or two in the whiskey or whatever it was, And so I knew what it tasted like, but and there was this thing with television back in the early 60s. There was, I think it was a Jackie Gleason show. There was a character, Crazy Guggenheim or something like that. Anyway, there were all these, what was his name on Andy Griffith? Otis, was it Otis the Drunk? There were all these characters in television, and they were all happy characters. And there was something I just knew. And our house was pretty unhappy, and there was a lot of fighting and screaming and whatnot. But whenever we would go to relatives' house and there would be drinking and partying, it was generally a pretty happy situation. And adults would give me attention and treat me in a way that I felt like I had worth. Whereas at home, I didn't feel like I had any worth. And so I think that set the mindset that I always knew there was something alcohol would supply that would help me. And so I was probably 12 years old or something. And I think it was during a party my mom and dad were having. They started doing that a lot during the early 70s. And I got hold of enough hard liquor of some sort to, where I could feel it. And I just remember jumping up and down on the couch and just felt wonderful. And I don't remember specifically if I got sick that time, but that was a real reoccurring theme up until till I was had a relapse at 22, that whenever I drank enough to get sick. And so it's just I didn't have an off switch, I can see now that was the compulsion. And it didn't, no matter how sick I got, I was done for the night once I got sick. But whether it's the next night or the next weekend, I'm doing it again. It never, I do remember, sleeping in the bathroom because it was just handier to stay close. And and I just I would just keep doing it over and over and over. And in high school, so it wasn't really so much in junior high school, but so I think this is where I really got more access to alcohol. So maybe 14, 15. I know I first started smoking pot on April 22nd and 23rd of 1972. It was a Boy Scout campout weekend, but somehow I knew that was going to change my life. And I even wrote the date down in the back of my bedroom closet. It's I don't know what normal people, what milestones they mark in their life. That was one of mine. Um, so, and I had also, so I kind of like, I mean, I've made peace with my mom. She passed away about 15 or 20 years ago, but I do say, she beat the self-esteem out of me before I went off to kindergarten. And I did that feeling that people say, I just, that I don't belong, I don't fit in, the other kids don't like me. Uh, Going to the Catholic school and having to walk past the public elementary school wearing salt and pepper corduroy pants and a red sweater didn't help at all. But and it's interesting now because kids are proud to go to Kennedy Catholic. I was ashamed, but I never anything that would make me feel different. Just I wanted to avoid anything to make me that made me feel different. Um, so when I did this, I would I drink occasionally, but then when I was 16, I got a job in an Elks Club in Renton, and my first shift was New Year's Eve, and I loved the atmosphere. They had the little band on the stage, and they played all these oldies like Mac the Knife, and um, you know, and I just loved that atmosphere. And partway through the night, the waitress I worked with, she hands me a vodka rocks and says, "Here, you want this? Go bust that table." And that was our relationship for the next 4 years. So she gave me liquor. I found I could sneak behind the bar, and when the bartender was in the bathroom or whatnot, and hit the speed bar. I had different members of the club were giving me drinks. Uh, yeah, and regularly, so like on Thursday nights they had their lodge meeting, and so I would like bust tables and do dishes, and then afterwards I would um, uh, well, the bartender, since they were having their lodge meeting, he'd go sit down and eat his dinner, and that's when I'd really hit the speed bar, and I'd fill up, at least two, I don't know, maybe 6, 7 shots in a glass. Then I'd run down into the bathroom and choke it down, and then I'd go get another one and I'd choke it down, and I would leave there so drunk. It was probably a 6, 7 mile drive home, and it's amazing I never got in a wreck on the way home. I did wreck a few cars though. That was kind of a reoccurring thing in my drinking. Um, but so a really important thing that happened. One of the younger waitresses became concerned about her drinking, and so she started seeing an alcoholism counselor. And we would all sit around after closing and talk and whatnot. And so in the daytime there wasn't quite as much drinking, but we were family. And she invited me to go to one of her sessions with this alcoholism counselor. And I still remember, the woman was a sober alcoholic, and I don't remember a whole lot about what she said, but I remember her saying something about her sobriety being so special because it's like getting sober is like being born, but being an adult and fully aware and able to experience coming into the world, you know, and that planted the seed. I was maybe 17 at the time. It planted the seed, and of course, and then I ended up moving to Capitol Hill, and I got a job downtown at the Westin, and I came out about that time too. So I started. I was underage, but these guys would get me into different gay bars, and I did a lot of drinking and a lot of throwing up, and so by I actually one time it was, I think it was the first ever Fat Tuesday. It was, I would do stupid stuff. But so I'm living up on Capitol Hill, and I decide to put on a caftan with some Christmas garland and make my way down to Fat Tuesday in Pioneer Square. I was drunk. I got drunk at home, Of course, I get down there and I couldn't, underage, I couldn't get into any of the bars down there. And I sobered up, and I remember just being mortified, trying to sneak home all the way from Pioneer Square to Capitol Hill, looking ridiculous, Another night, I ran a red light at Broadway and Pike, and broadsided a Fiat, and I was driving a van, and I bounced off her car, and we were both okay. But van spun around. I flew out of it, landed on my ass in the middle of the intersection. All these empties come out, and I'm running around the intersection, throwing them back in the. I got a ticket for running a red light. It was, but it was shortly after that. So by this time, I'm working downtown at the Westin, and I'd been living on Capitol Hill for less than a year. I also, after high school, there was a year where I lived in Renton, and I went to Renton Vocational's cooking program. And again, I would drink at this tavern with the students. I went in with them. The bartender, Gertie, she thought I was one of them, so she didn't card me. I was like 17, 18, And anyway, a lot of drunk and a lot of being sick that year. And I was going to school, I think 5 hours a day, and then I was working probably 30 or 35 hours a week too. And the important part of my story too is I did a fair amount of drugs in high school, and my dad caught me and whatnot a few times, and I felt bad about that. But once I started working in the Elks Club, I just stopped doing the drugs. So I thought there was a difference between alcoholism and drug addiction. And so when I first, so now I'm 20 years old, and I can't remember if there was, I don't think there was any, I had wrecked my van. I didn't have a vehicle anymore, but it had been some months. But I decided to quit drinking. And somebody in the neighborhood said something about, I know of these meetings. There's these gay AA meetings. So this was 1978, and it was up at a church up the other side behind Kaiser, and I started going, and I did get a sponsor. I don't remember anything being said about steps. I think my sponsor was like secretary of the Tuesday. It was a Tuesday Big Book study, and we didn't want to read the Big Book, and it was just a bunch of newcomers. So we had a business meeting and decided to change the name of the meeting to Literature Review, so that we could read pamphlets and others. I never, it was like I was afraid to go to mainstream meetings back then, and because I was afraid of homophobia. It was different. It was 1978. And a lot of it, back then, the way I see it, it was like the blind leading the blind, except we weren't even reading the book. So it was really, I thought you come to meetings to get help, whatever, So I stayed sober for like a year and a half, though. I had some, the only people that approached, the only men that approached me to carry the message that wasn't it wasn't this message that they were approaching me to carry. I like to say now, it took me 37 years in Alcoholics Anonymous to find the Alcoholics Anonymous program. And it was December, when I started again, a little over 8 years ago, and decided I would go to meetings in my own neighborhood in West Seattle. I've lived over here for 40 years now. And I got a traditional sponsor that took me through the book. We read the book together, did the steps. And this process is where I discovered the AA program. But you couldn't tell me. I remember at one time, it was probably in the early 80s, maybe 1990, somebody from our Awano Club had started going to the Solution Group. And they're coming in and they're talking about God. Well, I think I had 10 years at that time, or I don't know, maybe 7 years. I don't know. But anyway, you couldn't tell me I was doing anything wrong. And a lot of the time I stayed sober on ego and stubbornness. And, you know, that coin meant so much to me, but it was all ego, you know. Um, Now I try to just remember I have today, you know, and I got to be working. I got to do the work today. You know, I've got to get up and try to pray and meditate in the morning. Um, I have three little books. One is the Daily Reflection, one is from another program, and the other is from Hazelton. And each one of them has, you know, I read a page from it, and each one of them is a principle of the program. And I say a couple prayers. And a couple years ago, I decided I wanted to say the um, St. Francis prayer every day. So I typed it up and I clipped it out and stapled into one of my books. And so I start, you know, when I get to that book, it's like, God help me. And then it's like, and I wrote this thing in it. I think it's out of the 12 and 12. Show me the way of patience, kindliness, tolerance, and love. And so I read that every morning. And then it's like, please help me with my character defects. And lately, the one I've been specifically asking for help with is my judgment, because I've been, you know, the scared little boy. But what I'm realizing is I have done all this stuff to put up barriers to keep other people out, you know, and one of the big ones is judgment. And I picked it up from my mother too. I mean, you know, nobody's good enough, you know, and so I really would like to be able to take people for what they are. And you know, there was a meeting at Empire Way a couple years ago. It was on AA slogans, and this woman said love, and I'd never heard this one before, and it's a little awkward, but I love it. It's letting others voluntarily evolve. And it's like, yeah, because when I think back, you know, people have let me voluntarily evolve. um, but anyway, so I came to AA as a 20-year-old. After about a year and a half, I went out and drank one night, and it was, I don't know, it was just drama. And I came back in, and then I was, that was May 1st, 1980, and then it was somewhere, I think in December of 1982, that I made a conscious decision to start drinking. And it's just like it says in the book, which I hadn't read yet, that after a period of time, we think we have it licked. Well, I hadn't even read that part of the book. And I thought, well, I've stayed sober for over 2 years. That's certainly control, isn't it? And I made the conscious decision to start drinking. Within 30 days, I'd injected drugs for the first time. You know, yeah, that ended 3 years later, and I was, you know, drinking a fifth a day. And strung out on Valium and crystal meth, and doing, you know, week-long meth binges. I had lost my job. That was, yeah, it was my bottom. And that's what I came. So at that time, I went to treatment over at Sundown, and I that was the time I stayed sober for over 12 years. And I had a sponsor, but again, we didn't work the steps. I did those first 5 steps at Sundown, but we didn't. Me and my sponsor, we didn't do step work. And I did a lot of work on the Capitol Hill Lano Club. We had a great club for about 30 years, and I was very involved in it through the late 80s and the early 90s. And at some point, I got a resentment, though, because I was doing all this volunteer work, but I wasn't working a program, and I didn't have my sponsor moved away that I didn't do steps with anyway. And so I just decided, well, I'm going to go home and put all this energy into myself. And then I got in a relationship, and then the relationship ended a few years later, and I started hanging out places I shouldn't have, and somebody offered me some cocaine. And after 6 weeks of that, there was a little bottle of champagne that had been in the refrigerator for some years, and I decided to start. Well, I don't really have a sobriety. I've been lying to I'm really good at lying to myself about having a sobriety date when I don't really have a sobriety date. And that started 2 years of drinking every day, drinking a fifth every day, and shooting cocaine all weekend, and holding down a job. And I bottomed out after 2 years of that, and went back to Sundown. And Again though, so that was 2000. That was the June 2000 sobriety date. So at that point, and I haven't had a drink since then, but I think it was maybe around year 3 or 4, I started doing poppers again. Um, and then, and at some point, there was a year in there where I was drinking a bottle of Robitussin every day. Um, the guy who was my sponsor at the time, we started growing pot together, and yeah, I mean, it was just yeah, we're all here because we're not all there. But so then I started doing the coke again, and that lasted for 4 years. So in 2015, I was kind of it's like I had a home that was almost paid for. I had a retirement. I had a good job, and I just didn't care if the next hit killed me. Um, I really didn't, and the stress of work, and I just kind of thought about things, and I thought, okay, I can afford to take early retirement. I had been working on a pension for like 30 years, and I would take a penalty on it. And I think if I quit using, I can get by until Social Security kicks in. I was 57 at the time, and that's the way. And then I started going to meetings in West Seattle, and I started going to coming and answering phones with the Queen Anne Gay Group. And then I started coming and answering phones with the Full Monty, and I'm coming down next Saturday to answer phones with the Junction Men's Group. That's one of my, and I love to turn newcomers onto that. It's a great way to start getting into service, but at the same time, into fellowship too, because the fellowship's really important to me, but it's not the program. And it took me 37 years to figure that out. I don't know if I've ever heard another person with that kind of experience. It was like I was blind. That the whole idea that self-centeredness is the core of my problems. I didn't get it, and that was the other thing, is I was so stuck in being a victim from what had happened to me as a little boy that I couldn't get better. It wasn't my fault. How can I get better? Yeah, I didn't do this to me. Mom did it to me. All of that. And I will say, because I wasn't drinking, I wasn't, I was using some other substances, but I hadn't drank. She got sick in 2005, and I was able to step in, and she had a debilitating dementia, and went blind. And so I was able to step in and help out my dad and put railings up in the house, and sometimes and go up and relieve the caregiver for a few days off here and there and that kind of stuff. And seeing my mom as this frail person, she was just this little girl that her daddy had beat her. She never wanted to do what she did to me. And through that process, even though I had another big relapse after that, I was able to forgive her. Now I kind of say my mother had undiagnosed mental illness, but I was able, and it was I think it was because of the principles of this program that I was able to step up in the way I was. And then again, my dad lived for 18 months after my mom died, and I was able to spend quite a bit of time with him. And he told his caregiver that I was his best friend, and told me he was proud of me. And we went on a cruise down to Mexico together, and it was really special. But that was before I got clean again in 2015. Where I've done the steps in a much more thorough way. I never really had a chance to do the I'm sorry kind of amends. I did kind of a living amends, but I do kind of wish, it's like, Dad, Mom, thank you, and I'm sorry, But anyway, I love this program. I am absolutely blessed that I get to have sponsees. I don't know what they see in me, but I'm sure glad they keep showing up at my house, because I get to read this book and the other books. And right now I've got one guy, we read all the stories in here, and we decided to read Experience, Strength, and Hope. I picked it up down, picked a couple copies up, and we're loving it. Oh, it's incredible, So I did bring something to read, because what came out of my mouth for the last half hour might have been a lot of BS. I think it was pretty honest, though. but this is something I discovered again this time around in sobriety. Don't remember exactly where, but this is it's Dr. Bob's Humility. This was a plaque on Dr. Bob's desk in his office, and it's humility, perpetual quietness of heart. It is to have no trouble, to never be fretted or vexed, irritable or sore, to wonder at nothing done to me, to feel nothing done against me. It is to be at rest when nobody praises me and when I am blamed or despised. It is to have a blessed home in myself where I can go in and shut the door and kneel to my Father in secret and be at peace as in a deep sea of calmness when all about is seeming trouble. And, to me, that's just like love and tolerance. And last Wednesday's daily meditation on forgiveness. I mean, that just embodies, to me, that's our program. And that and helping others. So thanks, Laura.